Morning. Welcome to another episode of FYI, the program that brings you the happenings in and around our great city of Laurel. This morning we're going to continue with the series from Deacon Tim Tillman, and I'd like to welcome him back to our show. Welcome back, Deacon.
Thank you, Oliver. It's good to be here with you again today.
What are we going to talk about today?
Well, we're going to continue the conversation that we had last time we were together. We talked about Jesus being alive. He's on East Capitol Street in the city. He's on Main Street in Laurel. But what is it like to meet him on the street where you are today? We want to talk about meeting that Jesus in the neighborhood so we can spend time with him and we can build a community, we can build a neighborhood.
Okay. What does it mean? How would I know, as a person of faith or non-faith, how would I know when I meet Jesus?
Well, this is pretty simple. Everybody's looking for God to leap down out of the sky and present himself to people, but that's not really how it's going to happen. That's not really how it goes. As people, we are the body of Christ, and we're in touch with our God. You can see that. So the paralyzed man that we talked about last week, he understood who Jesus was when he was dropped through the roof and being in front of him. But he really met Jesus in the four men that carried him to the place. Mm-hmm. There's always that person in the community who embodies good things, and that person really is being Christ to us. So those four guys that carried the paralytic, they're Jesus. You saw a little bit of Jesus when the Pope got out of the Pope mobile and he kissed a sick man mm-hmm. who was in the square waiting to be part of the celebration of Mass with him. That's when you're going to go ahead and meet Jesus. You met Jesus in that group of men on the retreat. Mm-hmm. And you said, my spirit is alive, my spirit is different, my spirit is stronger because these people are around me. I feel this sense of love, I feel this sense of community. When you get that, that's meeting Jesus. Mm-hmm.
Deacon Tim, now you and I know how it feels to meet Jesus because we've met Jesus in many places and in many times. How do we tell someone else how they should feel when they meet Jesus?
I don't want to tell anybody how they should feel, but I just described a situation. We spent all this time talking about places where Jesus was mm-hmm. and is when we gathered last time. But I want to put myself or put yourself in the place of the paralytic that we talked about from Mark's Gospel. He met Jesus when he met those four men who picked him up and went through the crowd, found a way into the building, and found a way to take him to a place where his life could be transformed. Not just physically, but spiritually. That's where you meet Jesus. And you meet Jesus when you listen. So we're in the conversation last time we were here, and Tyler was here. Tyler's a lot younger than both of us. He's younger than most of my children. But when we got done talking, she said, you know, Deacon Tim, you talked about my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I want my old neighborhood back where people knew people and there weren't drug dealers. There wasn't crime in my neighborhood. But Tyler's 40 years younger than I am. Mm-hmm. Tyler is white and grew up in a white community. It wasn't in Detroit. It wasn't in Washington, D.C., but she grew up in a part of Laurel. That shows you that someone met Jesus. Jesus is alive, present in the neighborhood. And when that presence is there, there's this sense of peace, there's this sense of comfort, there's this sense that everybody's welcome. And you meet Jesus in people. So I hope to go meet those four guys that carried the paralytic in, mm-hmm. because when I meet them, I know that I'm going to discover something else about Jesus, and it's going to change the quality of my life in the place where I am.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talked about meeting Jesus that A lot of times we're looking up there, and Jesus is here. He's on the streets of Laurel. He's on the streets of Washington, D.C. My question is, if Jesus is out on the street, what is our need for going to church? Why do we go to church?
We still go to church for the same reason. It's good to sit down and find out what made the four men pick up the paralyzed person in their neighborhood and take them to a different experience. And we're human. We slip, we fall, we have all kinds of issues going on in our lives. And it's being part of the community, being part of the body of Christ that actually goes ahead and makes things work. And it's not so much thinking about church as the physical place, but it's the people that practice the idea of meeting, because it's in the one-to-one that you discover Jesus. When you speak one heart to another heart, when you listen and hear the things that make people anxious, you hear the things that people hope for, you get a sense of what their faith is and how their faith drives the way that they live their lives. You have to be in a place where you practice those things in order to be able to do that. So you say, if you wanted to be a better golfer, you would go practice with Tiger Woods. If you wanted to be a better basketball player, you would go spend some time with Michael Jordan. If you want to be a better believer, you have to spend some time in a community of believers. Tiger didn't play golf by himself. Michael Jordan was part of a team. You want to grow, you have to be part of a community that's going to help you grow. That's the reason to be in that setting, to be in church. And it's not about being in the building. It's about the people who believe and who are trying to act on their belief, because we can lift each other up and help us to move.
Now, we talk about faith. And if we met people, we touched on it a little bit last episode, but exactly, well, maybe not exactly, because faith is different for every person. But what is faith? How do you define faith? Tell us again.
Well, I go back to what Pope Benedict wrote in one of his first encyclicals, Saved in Hope. Faith is the belief in things unseen, but faith and hope are twins. Faith and hope are synonymous. So if you have faith and you believe in those things that are unseen, you hope for a better life, you hope for a better world, you hope to discover a deeper meaning in the truth, and that governs the way that you behave. And today we want to talk about meeting people and meeting Jesus. Meeting those four guys was meeting Jesus for the person that was paralyzed. What does that look like in the world today? Well, people are still hungry and thirsty for the truth. You want to see what the meeting looks like? Look at the story of Jesus meeting the woman at the well. And there's just so much richness inside of that story. First is the well, and we look at it. The well is like going to the other side of the tracks. We always talked about the other side of the tracks. That's where the bad people lived. The tracks could be the river. It could be a section of town that people talk about. But Jesus went to the other side of the tracks. He went to the well. He went to the well at the hour that the bad people gathered there, because the good women gathered at the well at the top of the morning. They didn't come to the well at noon.
Yeah, the water was cool then.
He wanted to meet someone at the well, and he went to the place where they were at the time that they would be there to meet them. He met them on their turf, on their terms, and on their time. And you see this big conversation going on if you look at the scripture story. But what you read when you look at that story is Jesus listened very intently, and he heard all of these things about the woman. And after hearing all of those things, the woman still wanted to stay in the conversation. And she stayed in the conversation because Jesus listened. And in that conversation, the woman mentioned their common ancestors. She says, well, when you talk about the living water, that's not the water that's in the well, but the thing that you're trying to offer me, is that the water that our ancestor Jacob talked about? Mm-hmm. So Jesus talked about an experience that they shared. So he had to know something about her and the place where she was so he could relate to her around that common experience. And then the real piece of the story comes at the end, where the woman walks away. Jesus did not ask her to do anything. Jesus heard about bad things that she did because she had been married multiple times. But the woman walked away from that story and she said, you know what? I met this man. He knew everything there was to know about me. You should meet him. My life is transformed. I think that he is the Messiah. Mm-hmm. The paralytic knew that he met the Messiah, and he knew he was going someplace where his life could be transformed when those 4 men walked out and carried him. And then he was able to carry someone else. When the woman met Jesus at the well, she went and she spoke to people about her own personal experience, and people came away from that experience saying, I listened to the woman and I believe what she said, but I have faith. I believe because I met Jesus. I went to see for myself. Mm-hmm. That's the idea behind having a relationship. That's the idea behind meeting. That's what one does when one goes into the neighborhood to meet somebody. And that is the piece that transforms.
Mm-hmm. Now, I get up maybe around 7 o'clock in the morning, and I come to this job. When I get to this job, there are certain things that I have to do. And if I don't do them, I will lose my job. Now, people have faith. Just like this woman, she gained faith by talking to Jesus at the well. What does one need to do to live out their faith? Just like you come to a job, you have certain things you have to do. What do one need to do?
Well, I just think about this, and Jesus is everywhere in all the things that you see, and Jesus is the gospel. He is the good news. I go back to the song from the 1980s, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Touch the World. And in the lyrics you hear, when we meet them at their need, we can touch them where they are and help them to believe. Mm-hmm. Think about what Jesus did with the woman at the well. If you want to see the quality of someone's life change, if you want to see the quality of your own life change, you want to do some things. First, be deliberate and intentional about meeting people and having a conversation about the truth and having a conversation about what excites them. Mm-hmm. Meet people where they are. Poor people don't hang out at the Ritz-Carlton. If you want to be in the church and you want the church to be a part of the neighborhood, where do people shop in the neighborhood? Where do people congregate in the neighborhood? Maybe they stand at the rec center. They gather at the bus stop. There's a favorite coffee shop. There is a favorite corner where people congregate. If you want to meet them, you have to go to that place and you have to look at it. You have to know it. You have to meet them where they are. And there's this idea in meetings that we talk about in organizing, and it's to recognize, to know again. So you go to the place where people are, and then you engage them in a real conversation about what they believe and what they hope for, and you listen. Mm-hmm. Jesus listened. The woman at the well had some issues, been married a few times, living with a man that she wasn't married to. Jesus heard all of those things, and he could have said, hey, you're a really bad person, but he didn't. He didn't condemn. He just listened and said, what do you believe? How do you want to act on what it is that you believe? Let's talk about that. Meeting people where they are, people discover that they have power, they have gifts, they have talent, and then they decide to act on the things that they have because someone said, I believe that God gave you some talent. How do you want to see that manifested in the world? What is it that you want to do to show that you are a believer? What's going to be different in the neighborhood because you believe?
Mm-hmm. Now, with that commentary, it brings us this into another realm. It leads me to think about a word that I didn't know for many years, I didn't know the meaning of, and that's evangelization. What precisely does evangelization mean?
You still hit me with the tough questions, Oliver. Evangelization is inviting somebody to have an encounter with the truth. At the end of the day, in Catholic theology and Christian theology, Jesus Christ is the absolute truth. And somebody's going to say, oh, Tim, you know, you Catholics are always going to talk about that. Nobody has a full grasp of the truth because you have to be in the hereafter. You have to be fully united with the Creator to have a full grasp, which means you have to die and experience the resurrection, which is eternal life. But when I think about that, I like to go back to the civil rights movement. And you think about the hundreds of thousands of people that came to Washington, they weren't all Catholic. They weren't all black. Some of them were atheists. Some of them were agnostics. But all of them were looking for some truth. All of them were looking to be part of community. And all of them said, you know what? I found this discovery of the truth. I feel compelled to act on what I have discovered. And I see this in all of these people that are gathered here. I believe what the atheist told me about the truth. I believe what that Christian person told me about the truth. I never had this conversation with a black person before, but I see what they believe and I see what they want to do. I want to do these things with them. Mm-hmm. And if you go back to that place, if you ask somebody about the experience of the march, you'll hear some things. There was this tremendous sense of community. There was this tremendous sense of hope. But if you look at it, Lyndon Johnson, great son of the South, great Dixiecrat, was transformed and says, I'm going to enact this civil rights legislation because it's the right thing to do. It's going to cost me politically, but I'm going to do the right thing. It didn't just transform people in the United States, it transformed people all over the world. Mm-hmm. And if you talk to someone that had that experience, they will still tell you about that. That's what it means to evangelize. It's to invite somebody to an experience like that. But it starts with that very simple trip. Those four men seeing someone in the community that they wanted to introduce to the truth, seeing somebody that's paralyzed in some way, shape, or form, not able to act on the truth in their own life, and picking them up, letting them see themselves in the mirror, introducing them to the Jesus that lives, and then watching them grow. That's evangelization. Mm-hmm.
Now, we talk about evangelization and what it means. Is there a process of evangelizing? What I mean by that, I'm turned off by a group of people sometimes who I admire what they do, it's how they do it that turns me off. Do we grab people by the neck and says, you got to believe what I believe? Or is there a process to evangelization?
There is a process, and all relating is meeting. If you get into John, not his Gospels, but the later texts in Scripture, John talks about meeting one-to-one. Mm-hmm. It's important to meet one-to-one, and it's important to go back to Jesus and the story of meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. Meet the person where they are. Be deliberate and intentional when you meet them. Remember that you learn more when you listen than when you talk. That's why we have one mouth and two ears. Mm-hmm. But listen with all of your senses. Look, observe the surroundings that the person is in. And when you listen, look for the common experience, look for the shared experience, and then speak to that experience. And speak to not what you want from the person to satisfy yourself, but probably the most powerful questions that have ever been asked to me says, well, Tim, you believe this. How is it that you want to act on what you believe? What would make you happy in this particular setting? And I go back through my experience of asking that question. I asked that question in the heart of Ward 8 in Washington, D.C., of a woman that lived in public housing, and she said, I want the kids in the neighborhood to be safe, you know. Mm-hmm. My sons have seen their lives be difficult. They've seen their friends die in the neighborhood due to violence, and I don't want people to see that anymore. But when she said that, and she started to talk to people about what she believed, she met with people in the community, and they built the Merrick Center next to St. Thomas More. Mm-hmm. And it became a haven for young people in the neighborhood, even to the point where there was a day that the police cruised the neighborhood, and they said something really must be up because I don't see anybody standing in front of the grocery store that they normally hang out in front of. There's nobody on the playground. There's nobody smoking or drinking in the usual corners where they are. There must be something really bad going on in the neighborhood, and everybody's engaged in it, and I don't know where they are. Mm-hmm. Well, those police cruised down to the Merrick Center and found that there were 200 young males inside the Merrick Center, bouncing basketballs and talking to people in the church. Because all of a sudden, they had some place to go. Mm-hmm. Because one person believed and started a conversation with other people in the neighborhood about what they believed, and they were able to build something that has the capacity to transform lives and brought hope to all of those guys that were normally standing on the corner. Mm-hmm. That is what you want to do, but it starts with that conversation like Jesus had with the Samaritan woman at the well. What is it that you believe? What are you thirsty for? How do you want to satisfy that thirst? Mm-hmm.
Well, we've been talking to Deacon Tim Tillman on, evangelization, truth, several other things. We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, he says I always put him on the spot. Well, I'm really going to put him on the spot when we come back, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay. What I'm going to ask you is, when we first started off, you started off with God addresses man, but I want to read this. Regardless of faith or religious practices, every person grows through life in search of truth. Mm-hmm. We have so many false prophets out there now. Mm-hmm. That how does one, people are even reluctant to listen to people now because they don't trust anybody. How do we get to the truth? How do we know when we are hearing the truth?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right.
That's not a hard question.
Okay. Okay. We're back, and as I said, we're talking to Deacon Tim Tillman. I told you I was going to put him on the spot. Well, we've been talking about truth and religion and evangelization. I want to read something here, and I'm going to ask Deacon Tim to expound on it. It says, regardless of faith or religious practice, every person goes through life in search of the truth, which is true. But we have so many false prophets out there now, so many people who are leading you wrong, even pastors are not leading the flock in the way that it should be led. So Deacon Tim, I want to ask you, how does one determine when he's listening to the truth or just something people are trying to put off on him?
Well, this is a conversation about relationships, and you want to relate. You want to meet a person where he or she is, and you want to know their motivation, which means you have to share your own motivation. And I'm thinking about two people that I heard on the radio recently. One of them is Father Stephen Boyle. He's a Jesuit priest who started Homeboy Industries in South Central Los Angeles. And when he talks about meeting Jesus, he said, I'm a priest and I studied all of these things, but I met God in the guys that were in the gangs in South Central Los Angeles. And he talked about meeting one gentleman in particular who, after going out and cutting and killing and doing all kinds of things, he said he's going to celebrate the holidays in a different way. But he said he invited his friends over for Thanksgiving. And he had a group of gentlemen who were in rival gangs that they tried to kill each other before. But after sitting down and spending time with Father Boyle, this homie discovered the truth. And that truth caused him to bake a turkey on the holiday to invite his rivals over. And they talked about life. They didn't talk about killing each other. They talked about how they could live together and how they could cook and invite more people to the banquet to have life be good. And the other person I heard on the radio was Congressman John Lewis. And he was reflecting on 50 years since they took that walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And the interviewer asked him a question. She said, Congressman Lewis, they were going to knock you in the head. They were going to kill you if you walked to the other side of the bridge. Why did you walk across the bridge anyway? And he said, love. I love the people that I stood with on one side. I love the people who threatened the lives of people I loved that were on the other side, and I wanted them to know that I loved. When you love people, people know that. Doesn't matter what language you speak, they know that you're genuinely concerned about them. Jesus was genuinely concerned about the woman at the well. The four guys that picked up the paralytic were genuinely concerned about the person that was on the mat and couldn't move from the place where he was in life without some help. And you have to love people. When you love, people come, people respond to that. And you can't love in one meeting. You have to really spend time listening and being in the place and walking in the shoes of the other person. Because that's what it means to walk with.
Well, before we close the show, I have 5 questions I'm going to ask you.
5 questions.
5 questions. You get 2 faith points for every question you answer right.
Okay.
All right. When did you encounter Christ, and what did you do after the encounter?
When did I encounter Christ, and what did I do after the encounter? I encountered Christ a number of times, but I'll go back to a question you asked me at the beginning. You're a deacon, you said. What made you do that? Well, I was around a group of people who loved me in a way that really surprised me. Some of them were Catholic, some of them were not. But I really appreciated the way that they loved me. Mm-hmm. And I said, what can I do to reach people in the same way that these people reached me? Mm-hmm. And when I started to work on that and meditate on that, and then I started to put what I meditated on into practice, I discovered something about myself, and I discovered something about Christ inside of me. And people came back to me and said, I see that there's something different about you. You're very serious about being Catholic, and you're very serious about that every day that I see you. Doesn't matter if I met you on the playground or in the grocery store. I met you in a rough neighborhood where they just had a shooting. I met you on the playground that's torn down. You still have this sense of faith. You still believe. Mm-hmm. That is encountering Christ.
Okay. Now, this next one is, when we hear this word, a lot of times we think about back in Jesus' times, not now. But are there demons present in our parish community and in our surrounding communities? Do we still deal with demons?
Of course we still deal with demons. We're having this conversation in the country about guns today. Mm-hmm. But guns don't kill people. People kill people. And that violence comes not just with someone pulling the trigger. That violence comes when we put somebody in a public school or in an education setting when we know they're not getting the things that they need to have. Those evil things that are in the world, those things are still demons. We use money as a weapon instead of using the wealth that we have to lift everyone up. The thing that causes us to be selfish, the thing that causes us not to be concerned about the quality of our brother or sister's life, that thing is a demon that prevents us from being all that we could be, and it also hurts our brothers and sisters in the community. And there are tons of things that happen that way. So when you see people suffering and you have the capacity to do that, demons are the things that prevent us from acting for the common good, which is also acting in our own best interests. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are still demons in the world. Mm-hmm. And to counteract the demon, we need to discover the truth, mm-hmm. which is the faith. And that faith is connected to the hope that mm-hmm. transforms lives.
Mm-hmm. Now, my next question is, now we've all had our upper room experiences, or we've been in places where we were down, we were afraid to open the door, and all of a sudden Jesus appears and he says, "Peace be with you." Have you ever had an upper room experience, and where was it or what was it?
I've had several upper room experiences, and those experiences get deeper. The experience that excites me the most today, I've sat down for the past year with a group of Catholic pastors. And the idea is, how do we build a church in the neighborhood again? How do we get back to the church of the civil rights movement that impacted the quality of life in every public institution in the community? It was driven by the church values. Mm-hmm. And it's Catholic guys, but they're trying to behave like Martin Luther King and Bayard Rustin and these guys. But King was not Roman Catholic. Bayard Rustin was a homosexual. It says, oh, we can't talk to them because he's one of them. But you have a homosexual, you have a serious and devout Christian, You had Catholic pastors and lay people sitting with them. You had all kinds of people sitting together and saying, what can we do to transform the community? This group of pastors is asking that question and saying, how can we act together to actually go ahead and be able to do that? I felt like that's the upper room setting. Mm-hmm. But that setting is the same experience that I had as a community organizer when there are 1,000 people gathered in a church setting and they said, we're going to work to invest $1 billion to rebuild neighborhoods in the city. It's the same setting that said, we can come together and rebuild stadiums and athletic facilities in the poorest neighborhoods in the city. And I go back specifically to sitting at Blue High School one day after the leaders in that neighborhood in Ward 8 had worked to get the stadium at Blue High School renovated. And I remember sitting in the bleachers with Robert Lee, who coached at Blue High School and grew up in the neighborhood. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking, and there's a group of kids from Washington Highlands Public Housing playing soccer. Mm-hmm. I'd never seen a group of kids play soccer in Ward 8. But they played soccer because somebody at church cared about kids and wanted to build a haven, and they acted on what they believed. And then you see what it's like to be in the upper room, and dessert is watching those kids be out there and play because somebody said, I believe this. I want to do something to help transform a neighborhood. Mm-hmm. We can do that if we're willing to engage in a conversation and meet people like Jesus met people at the well.
Mm-hmm. You're Deacon Tim Tillman. You're a deacon, you're a father, and you live in a neighborhood. Now, if you had the money and the resources to transform, not build a new neighborhood, but to transform a neighborhood, make it better, make it safer, make it more Christian, what would you do? What would be your model?
I like the Samaritan woman at the well. And people say, well, we can't go to a well and dip the bucket down in there and turn the crank and pick it back up. But one of the pioneers of the civil rights movement, Bob Moses, talked about how to meet people in the neighborhood, and he used the basketball. The basketball rolls, somebody in the neighborhood is going to pick it up. It's going to roll, it's going to hit somebody's step, and then he engages in a conversation with somebody that's there. And it all starts with meeting people where they are. If I wanted to transform the neighborhood, one, I'm going to go into the neighborhood, I'm going to start walking and talking to people. Mm-hmm. I could do the old Catholic thing, but we used to do the old parish census. And the old parish census, people from church showed up at church one day, and then they walked out and they knocked on doors in the neighborhood. And they didn't say, hey, I want you to come to church. They go back to the story of Janice. They went and talked to people on the playground. And they said, hey, let's have a little snack. Let's have a conversation. Here's someplace else where you can hang out in the neighborhood. I'm having a conversation with you here. Sometimes I spend time at this place that I call church. Mm-hmm. You're certainly welcome to show up there at any point in time. Don't have to do anything. I just am concerned about you. I can talk to you here. You can meet me there. Mm-hmm. We have to go back and just have those conversations. And when people realize that they are not in things alone, they will come back and take the faith that they have, the things that they believe, into their public life. And I heard this in my first days of organizing. I remember Reverend Edmund saying this to me, pastoring is not what you learn in school. Pastoring is something that you learn when you meet people. Mm-hmm. And then he followed that up with the problem in the neighborhood is the separation between church and state. Mm-hmm. We learn all these good things about the truth in church, And we need to take all those good things in the state. We don't do that very often. And because we don't do that, people do things that hurt people. If we take our faith into the public institutions where we are, then everybody will have that sense of the truth, and everybody will be like the woman at the well. The woman at the well said, I met this man, I met this group of people that believed in me. My life is transformed. Meet this person, come with these people. Your life will be transformed, and you have the power to transform the lives of others.
Well, that's our show for today. Sorry we have to end, but time constraints. But we'll be back. And when we come back, we'll be talking about a different episode on the community, faiths, meeting encounters, upper rooms, you have it. If you've enjoyed the show or you have a comment, we'll have our email address, our website, and we invite you to call us. Let us know if you enjoy what we're saying. If you have comments or things that you want us to talk about, let us know. We'll be back, and we hope you will too.